So thank you, Dennis, for the kind introduction, for tracking me down. My talk today is about the Salton Sea and the Colorado River, which is really very much zooming out from some of the detailed conversations we just heard. So I'm going to talk about broad themes across very large landscapes. So this image here is an image of the Salton Sea looking north from the New River Delta across a new causeway that was constructed for a project that the state of California is building to the Alamo River Delta on the very top left of your screen here. And what you can really see in the takeaway from this image here is how much the sea has receded, how much it's shrunk. So what we're seeing in this image is that the sea is, the elevation of the sea has dropped about 11.5 feet in the past 20 years. It's about 50 square miles smaller than it was 20 years ago. And the 20 years ago is important because that's when the Quantification Settlement Agreement, or the QSA, was signed, which ushered in a lot of these changes we're seeing at the Salton Sea. Other takeaway from this image is that the Salton Sea is concentrated Colorado River water. So what we see on the north end here is some geothermal plants, but a lot of irrigated fields in the Imperial Valley. Water or fields that are irrigated with Colorado River water. So just a quick overview of the talk. I'm going to give a little bit of context, talk about water supply reliability, the crisis on the river that many of you have heard about, linkages between the river and the Salton Sea, and then talk a little bit about progress at the Salton Sea. Time limits me here from getting too detailed into any of these topics, so what I think might be more instructive is I just give a very basic overview of a lot of these topics and then leave it open for questions, and then we can see where the audience wants to go with this. So this image on the left is the hydraulic infrastructure of the Colorado River, the state of California. And at the very bottom, you can see the Colorado River Aqueduct, the All-American Canal, and then the Coachella Canal branching off of that, which are the main conveyances taking water from the Colorado River into Southern California. But the point here is how interconnected the state of California is, and that this water from the Sierras is taken down to Southern California, but that puts pressure on Central Valley farmers as well as people in the Bay Area dependent on water from the Sierras. And then, as you, I'm sure all know, some 40% of water in an average year serving Silicon Valley comes through the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project. So this water that's coming across from the Sierras is also being drawn down. So the pressure on that system from Southern California is alleviated quite a bit by the Colorado River. And this image on the right is the Colorado River Basin. So the Colorado River Basin is about 250,000 square miles. So the scale on these two images is not the same. Colorado River Basin covers 7 states, 4 in the upper basin, and then 3 in the lower basin. Some 80% of water in the Colorado River comes from elevations above 9,000 feet. Primarily here in Colorado. I'm speaking to you from Boulder, not too far from the headwaters. On the other hand, last year, California, which only contributes about 4% of the river's flows, took about a third of the total Colorado River flow. So why is this important? Well, here's a different way to look at this. This image just simply shows metropolitan water districts of Southern California, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, their take of Colorado River water. So in 2021 and 2022, average take on the river was about 1.1 million acre feet. And then the red line you can see was the 5% state water project allocation in those years. This year, it's of course 100%, in fact, 100% plus. And as a result, metropolitan is taking much less water. So this, the bar on the right, the forecast is 730,000 acre feet, down some 400,000 acre feet from last year. But the use to date is only 475,000 acre feet by net of Colorado River water. So my guess is they'll be coming in maybe at 630,000 acre feet, or some 500,000 acre feet less than they took last year. And that's water ultimately that's going to be kept back in storage and help maintain critical elevations at Lake Mead. So critical elevations at Lake Mead have been a topic of considerable interest up until we had this massive snowpack in this, I guess, start of this current water year. But this crisis is not new. So 130 years ago, John Wesley Powell, in a speech to irrigators, and I believe the speech was actually in Los Angeles, noted simply that there's not enough water to meet all the demands and uses that people were expecting, and that this was simply going to lead to conflict. And sure enough, that's what's happened. And we again saw these images, and there were a lot of these images end of last year and the beginning of this year of these barren landscapes. This is Lake Mead, and as the lake receded, we saw they found bodies there, bodies encased in concrete near Las Vegas, a lot of ships or boats that had sunk that were now stuck in the mud. And what we saw was that some 170 feet of this bathtub ring, right? So Lake Mead's elevation between 1999 and the start of 2023 dropped 170 feet, and that's what led to this bathtub ring, and this very real concern that not only we're going to potentially lose power pool, particularly at Lake Powell, but also eventually at Lake Mead, but also that these two reservoirs could go to dead pool when water could no longer leave the system, cutting off the water supply for millions and millions of people. So here's some different way to look at this. These are some projections from December of 2021, so 21 months ago. And you can see that even this green dotted line, which was the most probable projection, had the elevation of Lake Mead dropping to about 1035 in 2 months from now. So things were dire, and and the projections were that things were going to get worse and worse. But what's happened is, because of this extraordinarily wet year, the elevation of Lake Mead is up some 27 feet, or will be up 27 feet by November. Partly because of reduction efforts throughout the basin, but primarily, again, because of the tremendous precipitation that we heard about earlier that affected California, this 300% snowpack in the Sierras, meaning, as I showed just a couple slides ago, that Metropolitan could really reduce its use of Colorado River water. And then there's also been significant reductions in the state of Arizona, and Nevada itself has also reduced its use by by more than a third, actually. So in 2002, Nevada used more than 320,000 acre-feet of water. This year, they're projected to use less than 200,000 acre-feet, despite adding hundreds of thousands of people. So the takeaway here is that water conservation has really been working. The best example of that, again, is Southern Nevada Water Authority and the Las Vegas metro area, banning turf and really pretty stringent water restrictions have led to this buildup of supply. So here's a slightly different way of looking at the water and storage at these two reservoirs. And again, this was last December. So the big water conference last year in Las Vegas, Bureau of Reclamation posted this slide and said, based on low flow hydrology, the system could drop to 17% of capacity at these two main reservoirs. And what instead has happened is that we've got an additional 9 million acre-feet of water in storage because of this very wet year, because of these reductions. So basically, roughly doubling the amount of water in storage. But it was because of these projections that last June, the commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation called on basin users throughout the basin, upper and lower basin, to reduce their total annual water use by 2 to 4 million acre-feet, as much as a third per year. Right, this is a staggering reduction on top of the reductions that have been made over the past 20 years. So that was a real shock to the system, a shock to the users, and it caused a lot of wrangling and hard feelings. And some of those divisions still have not been bridged, particularly between the upper basin and the lower basin. But within the lower basin states of Arizona, California, and Nevada, they've come to some agreements. They're promising to store or conserve some 3 million acre-feet over the next 4 years through 2026, which looks to be enough to stave off these really low elevations, at least through 2026. So let's pivot a little bit, talk a little bit about why the Salton Sea is important to this, how the Salton Sea figures into this. So here's an image that just shows you the Colorado River on the right side, the Salton Sea, just again, about 90 miles southeast of Los Angeles. And you can see this image here, and I'm not sure if my cursor is going to show up, but this image, what I'm circling right now is the Imperial Valley, which has rights to about 20% of at least the historic annual flow of the Colorado River, roughly the same size as the Mexicali Valley in Mexico, which uses about half as much water. And that's why you can see this from the satellite image, the much greener irrigation pattern in Imperial Valley than Mexicali Valley. But what we've seen is that as Imperial Valley has become much more efficient, which means less water flows into the Salton Sea has shrunk. So there's a book that came out in 1999 by Bill DeWeese, which I highly recommend, called Salt Dreams. And in that book, he says, in low places, consequences collect. So the Salton Sea is currently about 240 feet below sea level. And what's collecting there, not only the salts and selenium and pesticides and fertilizers that flow down the river, but some of the policy consequences that have ensued as Imperial Valley has become increasingly efficient, meaning that the Salton Sea shrinks. So there's a couple of factors that drove this. This is just an image showing diversification of San Diego County's water supply, which is the key part of the QSA that was signed again 20 years ago. But even before the QSA was signed, back in 1988, right, some 35 years ago, there was a transfer agreement signed between Metropolitan Water District and Imperial Irrigation District for about 100,000 acre feet. So in the early 90s, there was yet another drought in California, and San Diego felt that they were disproportionately impacted and decided to diversify their water supply. So they reached out to IAD using the precedent of the Metropolitan transfer. And it took them many years, close to a decade, to finally negotiate that. And through that, they're getting some 200,000 acre feet of water directly from Imperial Irrigation conservation efforts, lining the All-American Canals, another close to 70,000 acre feet. So really bolstered their water supply portfolio. But the real sticking point for the QSA was what happens to the Salton Sea. And people knew that because the Salton Sea is dependent on runoff from Imperial Valley, the less runoff meant a smaller Salton Sea. And the Salton Sea provides a host of values. So some 400 different species of birds visit the Salton Sea and the Salton Sea region. It's a critical stopover on the Pacific Flyway, which is even more important because California has dried up some 95% of the wetlands throughout the state. So there's not that many places left for birds to go. It's also important because of public health. So as that initial image I showed you of the shrinking Salton Sea, that roughly 50 square miles of lake bed emits a lot of dust. And air quality standards in Imperial and Coachella Valley are regularly violated. The air quality is already bad, and the shrinking Salton Sea essentially exacerbates an already bad situation. So this raises the question of why are we fixing coastal California's water supply issues and ultimately the Colorado River Basin water supply issues on the backs of birds and on the backs of frontline communities. There's a host of challenges at the Salton Sea. I'm just going to, again, highlight at a very high level some of these. Again, the scale of the Salton Sea, it's a huge body of water, some 314 square miles right now. Again, it's shrunk some 50 square miles, largest body of water in the state of California, some 35 miles lengthwise, about 9 to 15 miles in width. And again, as it shrinks, it creates a host of externalities. So it creates dust. And the initial concerns about this dust was that the physical size, the particulates in that dust was causing problems, but we're increasingly learning that there's some chemical signatures, and now there's some studies out of UC Riverside that are suggesting that there's even some biological markers on that dust that are causing inflammatory responses in the lungs of people that are inhaling the dust, sea spray. So there's a host of public health challenges associated with the shrinking Salton Sea. Flip side of that is there's multiple benefits that can be achieved at the Salton Sea by building a project that addresses the needs of the communities and the species that rely on the Salton Sea. But this has become a challenge as well because there's multiple jurisdictions down there. And it's not always clear which jurisdiction is responsible. There's a lot of interest now in the Salton Sea Management Program, financing or funding benefits or amenities that may not be directly related to their mission. So how we resolve those tensions remains to be seen. And again, getting to this multiple jurisdictions, you can kind of see in this image a checkerboard pattern. So this checkerboard pattern continues under the Salton Sea, and there's multiple landowners. There's federal landowners, tribal landowners. The state owns some land. The irrigation district owns a fair amount of the land under the Salton Sea, and there's some private landowners as well. And this creates real land access issues because as they're trying to build projects, the projects may make sense from a contour perspective, but don't make sense from a landowner perspective. So they have to track down who the landowner is, get agreements from the landowners, easements, work out liability issues. So it's moving, at least from my perspective, pretty slowly, but there are a lot of hurdles to overcome. And one of the efforts to overcome this is to figure out a governance system, particularly for the long term of the Salton Sea. And actually, just last Friday, a bill by Senator Padilla, State Senator Padilla, passed through the Assembly. So it's now passed both houses, now being parked back in the State Senate as they work out some issues with the administration, to look at a conservancy for the Salton Sea, to help consolidate operations, to work on operations and maintenance, and to bring some of the different parties together. But let's talk about some of the progress that we've seen at the Salton Sea. So this is the state's project to date. It's a 4,100 acre wetland project. It's a huge, huge project at a cost of more than $206 million. So the project is largely constructed. They just need to open some valves. Really waiting as they're doing some exploration on an SCH expansion project. So rather than flooding this up, they're allowing surveyors to get out there on the land to look at what the next steps might be. And then associated with that, there's a host of dust suppression efforts being led both as mitigation for the QSA itself, some 2,700 acres dust suppression projects built by Imperial Irrigation District, and then more than 1,700 acres of dust suppression projects built by the state of California to date. So maybe to take a step back a little bit, people wonder, why don't we let the Salton Sea dry up, or how are we going to get water to the Salton Sea? And I guess the quick answer to that is that even as the Imperial Irrigation District becomes increasingly efficient, there will be huge, huge amounts of water, 500,000 acre feet, 700,000 acre feet of water or more flowing into the Salton Sea. So most of the restoration projects that we've seen in the West, the sticking point is really the absence of water. So the San Joaquin River, for example, how do you get water to these desiccated systems? And while the Salton Sea is certainly shrinking, the amount of inflows are declining. The good news here is that there will be, as long as there's farming in the Imperial Valley, a lot of water flowing into the system. So to my mind, the solution here is to optimize the use of that water, to capture that water, spread it out along the shoreline, create really good habitat for birds. And we know this can be done both because the SCH is well under progress, but because from 2006 to 2010, the Bureau of Reclamation, in cooperation with USGS, built a 100-acre pilot project, pretty small project, but more than 200 different species of birds visited that project, including white pelicans, brown pelicans. And then when they drained the project, they found more than 1 million endangered desert pupfish in there. So we know that simply capturing this water, spreading out across the landscape, can attract huge numbers of species, diversity of species, and it also suppresses dust. So once you put water out there, there's not dust blowing off across this landscape. So that's been a really high level, super fast overview of both the Colorado River and the Salton Sea. But maybe, Dennis, it would be good to open it up for questions here. I've just put up a quick list of links for future reading or exploration or viewing. There's a bunch of videos. This last link here, the packets.org/videos, I've been posting a series of webinars on the Salton Sea, all of which are posted at this last link. Anyway, a lot of resources about the Salton Sea, a lot of resources on the Colorado River. My email address is up there, so I'm happy to answer questions now, and happy to follow up with emails.
Yeah, I'm okay, looking at Q&A, but there are a number of things you mentioned struck me. One is, like, all right, so you're in the Bay Area, and you mentioned a couple things that would tend to rankle people in the Bay Area, or perhaps in the past. But one was about, like, so if you're, oh, that's so far away, almost like the why should I care issue. And so you mentioned about, say, just with the Colorado River, about, just the water supply of the Colorado River. And, well, the two things that would, one was the Colorado River water, like, has a benefit to the Bay Area. The usage of it has a benefit to the Bay Area and Central Valley, from a kind of a usage perspective. I mean, the other thing, though, you mentioned the degree to which the Bay Area uses imported water, roughly on par with Southern California, really. But there's a very possessive mindset about our water. Anyway, those two things were quite interesting. I just wondered if you had any other thoughts about the benefits of like a successful Colorado River usage plan, and how that benefits regions away from the Colorado River.
Sure. So part of what I was trying to get at with this water supply reliability question is the amount, how much the Colorado River benefits Metropolitan Water District, right? So Metropolitan delivers water to 19 million people, has tremendous resources, tremendous political power. And last year, when there was these significant drought restrictions throughout California, those drought restrictions did not apply to 12.3 million people in metropolitan service area, because those people had access to Colorado River water. So because of this reliance, they were able to shift their focus to the Colorado River rather than putting additional pressure on the Bay Delta, on the State Water Project, on growers in the Central Valley, because otherwise there would have been a lot of additional metropolitan dollars chasing scarce resources in the Central Valley, which would have made that water less available to farmers and to other cities that rely on that water supply. So by having this real buffer in the form of the Colorado River, it takes a lot of pressure off other areas in the state.
Yes, certainly, and so it's yeah. So I guess you'd probably term it like this, almost water supply domino effect, or preventing that. Just the other thing with Colorado River water, besides metropolitan, is the Imperial Valley Irrigation District, and I think they have a substantial stake. I mean, besides with metropolitan, and do you, in terms of their practices, have they been changing? I mean, this is mostly representative of a number of growers in the region, but anything to report there?
Sure. So IID is the single largest user of Colorado River water. They're going to use more water from the basin of the Colorado River this year than the entire state of Arizona. They're a huge user, and therefore they have a huge target on their back. So everyone's always looking at them to help solve, or to solve singularly, the problem of the Colorado River. But what's often overlooked is that IID has already reduced their use of Colorado River water by some 17%. So in the past 20 years, their use of the river is more than 500,000 acre feet lower than it was in 2003. That's through efficiency, through lining canals, through farmers shifting from flood irrigation to drip and sprinkler systems, to pump back irrigation or pump back systems. So they've become much more efficient, and they're still irrigating 98% of the land that they irrigated 20 years ago. So they've shown that you can transition from a less efficient system to their current status while keeping land in production. So this is a huge cut, and now they're being asked to do as much again, or almost as much again. So part of the agreement that California signed or proposed back in January and then finalized in May was that California would contribute 400,000 acre feet of water per year, 250,000 of that from Imperial Irrigation District. right? So half again, as much as they've already conserved. It took them some 20 years to ramp up, and now they're being asked to do that in 1 year. So that's a big ask, and that's not keeping land in production. That's taking land out of production.
Yeah.
And unemployment in Imperial County is among the highest in the state. So taking land out of production simply means fewer jobs, more people out of work. So there's again this externality as we're trying to save or balance the system, the Colorado River system, and ultimately California's water supply on the backs of a pretty impoverished community, on frontline communities that have very bad health outcomes, high rates of unemployment, and fewer opportunities. So that's the tension, and that's often felt foremost, front and center by people in the Imperial Valley. And then they look to the coast and think, wow, there doesn't seem to be much difference on the coastal communities. They're continuing business as normal, but they're in the Imperial Valley and Coachella Valley, communities around the Salton Sea, much more dust, lots more kids with asthma, lots more hospital visits, and then fewer jobs. So that's the trade-off, and that's what people are concerned about.
I also, yes, speaking, I was thinking of dust and with the Salton Sea, and I just wondered, one question came up. I mean, this area is prime for kind of lithium production for batteries and things, and there are some like hard rock lithium mines, I guess Thatcher in Nevada, but you know, because of the high the geothermal potential and the high gradient in the area, I just wondered if you had thoughts about lithium dust in the Salton Sea.
Well, so there's a lot of lithium in the brine that's being pumped out by the geothermal plants. Lithium in the Salton Sea is probably equivalent to lithium you're going to find anywhere else. But there's a lot of lithium within the brine that they're pumping out from 5 or even 9,000 feet below the surface. So it's not, there's no direct connection.
Oh, no. I was just thinking because of the dust issues and then, you know, development, exploitation of lithium sources. I wasn't
right. So but that's exactly right. And in fact, just last Thursday, Pacific Institute hosted a webinar on lithium at the Salton Sea. So to give a quick plug, hackins.org/videos.
I'm gonna have to. I hope that's recorded. I want to see.
It's recorded. It's online. It was on this further reading list that I just showed. And there's an industry. There's a Berkshire Hathaway industry spokesperson on the webinar. Community member Supervisor Ryan Kelly from Imperial County, and then Sylvia Paz, who was the co-chair of the Lithium Valley Commission, moderated the panel. So if people are interested in that, I highly recommend checking out the video.
Yeah.
Short answer is there's a lot of unknowns about how productive this is going to be. So at lab scale, they've demonstrated they can extract lithium from the brines. But the question is, can you extract it at a commercial scale? So there's a couple pilot facilities that are exploring just that. We're hoping to know in the next year or two whether that'll be viable at a commercial scale. And then there's a lot of hope and optimism in the community that this will lead to good paying jobs. But again, unclear, and we're still waiting to find out whether this will really work at scale.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I mean, it just, you know, it's very different geographically, and but fascinating. You know, it's the diversity of California, but I think in both cases, I mean, these are these areas, there's a lot of issues. I mean, you know, as you mentioned, just even water in the Imperial Valley and stuff, and you know, growing alfalfa or something, you know, but it's not that simple, right? And even the lithium question about the one of the rare aspects of economic opportunity, you know, dependent on the development there. So yeah, I'll definitely hunt down that webinar. I'm glad you mentioned that. And I know a few of us here at SSB are interested in this topic, because we've been doing just even blog posts, and I think Matt Abbott is on here, about like even home battery backup, in terms of the coming winter storms and things, and power outages and things, and obviously what supplies the batteries, and it's more like maybe it's lithium iron phosphate, is better, but it's still lithium. So don't think we're getting away from that. And so thanks, and we'll couple sessions on we'll get onto coastside in San Mateo County, and then we'll get really big in terms of the Pacific and the warming ocean temperatures. So thanks very much.
Thank you.